One of the most raging debates that I've watched and have observed since the mid 1990s, and this what ifs and woulda couldas and what if this and whatever, right? Is what if the Houston Rockets face the Chicago Bulls in the finals? For those who root for the Houston Rockets and Hakeem Olajuwon, they say, well, Jordan never faced a dominant center in the finals. And the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan fans say, well, if Jordan had retired in the first place, Hakeem Olajuwon would have never won those titles. And perhaps his legacy would be different. I tend to think, personally, that in 93-94, the Bulls would have beaten that team. Just based on the fact that I think Scottie Pippen was at his absolute prime between 93 and 95. That was the first year that the nucleus of the Chicago Bulls were really coming to fruition. I think that B.J. Armstrong at the time was playing the best basketball of his life. The only gray area is the disgruntled Horace Grant. That was the best season Horace Grant actually had. If you don't have a disgruntled Horace Grant, all right, who's putting aside all of his grievances with the Chicago Bulls organization, and he's playing the type of basketball that he was playing at that particular time. You had the Chicago Bulls. You had Ron Harper, who was a little bit younger, but had changed his game in comparison to the later championship years. This is a couple years younger. He was about 30 years of age at that time. Just turned 30. Became a defensive stopper, defensive player, as opposed to the scorer that he was with the Cleveland Cavaliers and the LA Clippers. I think that with Michael Jordan at that time, let's just say the year before he averaged 32.6 points per game on 49.5% shooting from the field. Let's say this particular season he averages 31 points per game on 50% shooting, right? This is the same team without Michael Jordan that took the New York Knicks to 7 games. I strongly believe that with Michael Jordan on that team, they beat the New York Knicks. All right. And matter of fact, they wouldn't have even played them in the semis. They would have played them in the Eastern Conference. They would have beaten the New York Knicks. And I think they would have overwhelmed that Houston Rockets team. And I know people like to make this comparison about, well, Chicago never played a dominant center in the finals. It's not like Chicago hasn't played teams that didn't have dominant centers. I mean, come on. I mean, the evidence is there's so much evidence to state that it doesn't matter who the fuck is down low. Michael Jordan in his prime was going to score, and nothing could be done about it when the man was on. I think younger people just don't get it. They don't get it. It doesn't matter. Who was down low on April 20th, 1986 when the Bulls were playing the Boston Celtics? Who were the centers primarily? Robert Parrish and Bill Walton, 2 Hall of Famers. Jordan scored 63 points. Doesn't matter who's down there. I'll pull up a comparison right now, all right? The great, well, I'm not going to call him the great. He wasn't great center, but he was great in 2 facets. He was great in defense and historically great in shot blocking. Mark Eaton. Now, Mark Eaton played against Michael Jordan 16 times in his career. All right? They were regular season games. He played against him 16 times. The Utah Jazz actually have a winning record against them. I'll give them that. They have a winning record against them, 9-7. But in those 16 contests, Mark Eaton put up 8 points per game, 11 rebounds, 3.8 blocks on nearly 54% shooting. Michael Jordan averaged 35 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals, 1 block on 48% shooting from the field. Attempted 12 free throws per game. So it's almost as if he took it as a personal challenge. But that free throw total, that tells me he took it as a personal challenge that Mark Eaton was down low. You're not going to stop me. And he had one of the most vicious dunks I've ever seen in his career against Mark Eaton, the guy who holds the record for most blocks per game since they've been officially counted since the 73-74 season, with 3.5 blocks per game in his career, and he holds the record for most blocks in the season. I think it was 85-86 season, with 5.6 blocks per game. Michael Jordan had one of the most vicious dunks of his career on Mark Eaton.
Eaton the rebound, tipped away to Paxson though. Bulls keep it. Pax gives it to Jordan. Michael in deep. Ducked both hands on Mark Eaton. 34 for Jordan. It's a 6-point game. 2-hand jam up over Mount Eaton.
Oh boy, that'll make you take a timeout in a hurry, won't it?
And that's what Frank Layden does with 6:59 left. 80-74 Utah. Back after these messages on the Bulls Network.
No one picked the next halftime score. So we have a random draw.
And I'm looking at, it's not like he had like a couple of 50-point games and the rest of them were stinkeroos. All right. 28 points, 26 points, 45 points, 27 points, 47 points, 45 points, 33 points, 27 points, 40 points, 43 points, 29 points, 37 points, 37 points, 34 points, and 37 points. And also, I think a lot of those losses came earlier in his career against the Utah Jazz. The point being, Michael Jordan is unstoppable in his prime. It doesn't matter who was on that team. I remember one of the highest scorers games of his career against the Orlando Magic, when Shaq was on that team, with 64 points. Against the likes of Patrick Ewing, how many memorable performances do we know of? How many 40 and 50-point games he had against Patrick Ewing? All right. He had numerous 30 and 40-point games against David Robinson. Matter of fact, let me pull this up right now. Let me pull up a comparison between Hakeem Olajuwon and Michael Jordan while we're doing this. Now, another thing I want to add to this is when you have these arguments, people like to say, well, Michael Jordan never faced a great center in the finals. But let me say something. During the years where the Houston Rockets were not able to make it to the finals, right? Who were beating them? Who were beating the Houston Rockets? And the answer to that would be the Seattle Supersonics and the Utah Jazz, right? Now, who were on those teams that were great centers? Nobody. Irvin Johnson, not Magic, but Irvin Johnson, Greg Ostertag, all right, they weren't great centers. What beat them were the fact that each one of those teams played just better team basketball, and they had generally very good or great perimeter defenders. Because Hakeem Olajuwon has to get the basketball. Michael Jordan can get the ball anytime he wants to. And one thing I see with that matchup is you look at the guards that the Houston Rockets had, right? And Vernon Maxwell was good. He was a good defensive player. Kenny Smith was good. He was a great shooter. Pretty good point guard earlier in his career, but he wasn't a Hall of Famer or all-star caliber type guy, in my opinion. And Sam Cassell, who was an all-star later on. All right. Well, I'll say Kenny was a borderline all-star, but no, they were good players, but all of them were like 6'3" and under, 6'3", 6'2" range. Ron Harper and Michael Jordan are 6'6". Both good defensive players. Jordan in his prime, great defensive, historically great. Scottie Pippen, historically great. I see a lot of deflections and steals by the Chicago Bulls from them trying to give the ball, give the ball inside, dump the ball inside. To Hakeem Olajuwon. I see a lot of steals. All right. I see Kenny Smith, Sam Cassell, and Vernon Maxwell, especially Vernon, who was very streaky. Historically, only shot 33% from downtown. I see Vernon Maxwell having horrible shooting nights. I see Kenny Smith and Sam Cassell having inconsistent scoring nights. Sam Cassell was a little bit inconsistent at that time anyway. I see Hakeem Olajuwon probably doing his thing, but him not getting much help. And those of you who want to bring up Clyde Drexler, remember, in '94, Clyde Drexler wasn't there yet. So a lot of the scoring assignments going to fall on who? Otis Thorpe? No, Otis Thorpe can get you 15, 16, 17, 18 points per game. But is he going to give you 25, 26, 27 per night? I don't think so. Carl Herrera, is he going to make it up? No. So it's going to be a tall order for Hakeem Olajuwon. He's going to have to average 30-plus points per game to beat the Chicago Bulls. It could be done, but it's a tall order. It's a tall order, especially if you can't get the basketball. And I also see a lot of fast break buckets for the Chicago Bulls. A lot of them. I just see the Chicago Bulls beating this team something like 4-2. Now, I got the matchup. They played each other 23 times. And Hakeem Olajuwon averaged 22 points, 11 rebounds, 2 assists, nearly 2 steals, and 3 blocks. Michael Jordan, 30 points, about 5.5 rebounds, about 5.5 assists, 3 steals. Remember what I was saying about a lot of steals. And while the numbers are a little bit closer, Michael Jordan clearly still got the better of them in these matchups, I would say statistically. I see a 44-point game. I see another 44-point game. Many numerous 30-point games. I see a couple of games where Jordan struggled a little bit from the field, but I see some games where Hakeem Olajuwon struggled as well. And I also see some games where, as I was saying earlier, Hakeem Olajuwon took relatively few shots, which I was saying, and I just kind of made that guess, and I think I might be correct a little bit. There's probably some games where he was having problems getting the basketball. And that's what I was talking about earlier. I think that in '95, however, I think with the departure of Horace Grant, I think that that would hurt the Chicago Bulls. But I have to tell you this, and a friend of mine told me this too. When you have a guy like Michael Jordan who just never lost in the finals, and I don't want to include that rusty version of Michael Jordan because he wouldn't play like that. It's hard to bet against Michael Jordan in the finals. You have to figure that it'll be some type of way he would figure out how to win this thing. Whether it have to be that he have to take 40 shots a game at one game, or he would have to just take on, he would have to be the ultimate distributor. You think he would figure out some type of way to win a game, because that was the most important thing to him. He was the ultimate competitor. And one other area where I think that Michael Jordan holds a distinct edge against Hakeem Olajuwon for, no matter how great a player Hakeem Olajuwon was, he was sometimes, and I know some people are going to disagree with this, but he was sometimes criticized a little bit for sometimes making not such high IQ plays out there at times. But Michael Jordan had one of the highest basketball IQs when he was playing. And while I will say that perhaps with Clyde Drexler on that Rockets team in 95, maybe they would have beaten the Chicago Bulls because they weren't really a 6 seed. They did go 47-35, but some of that was due to injuries. If I remember correctly, Hakeem Olajuwon missed 10 games earlier in that season. They had some other injuries. But that team may have beaten the Chicago Bulls. But if you're going to make a matchup between, let's say, the 72-win Bulls and either one of those Rockets teams, the Bulls are going to win hands down. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind about that one. Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen were still close enough to their primes. Ron Harper is a very underrated defensive guard at that particular time. He may have been at that time, he may have been the second or third best defender on that team. Michael Jordan still was one of the top, I think, 20 defensive players in the league at that time. Scottie Pippen was probably a top 1 or 2 defensive small forward at that time. Well, I'll say top defensive small forward at that time. Dennis Rodman, though he wasn't quite what he was with the Detroit Pistons, he was one of the better defensive players at that time, probably a top 15 defensive player at that particular time. Hakeem Olajuwon, while he's going to do what he does, he's going to get off. He's going to score. Clyde Drexler is going to score. But Clyde wasn't quite what he was before. He wasn't the 27, 28 point per game scorer he was in Portland before the knee injury in 92. He was more of a 18, 19, 20 points per game guy. So Clyde will give you some points, but he wasn't the same guy. Like I said, I think that the Bulls' size down low would give them some problems. The Bulls' size in the perimeter would give a lot of the backcourt some problems, aside from Clyde Drexler. And I think that ultimately I will see that maybe the Rockets would have won in 95. That 95 version team, maybe, if you're talking about another team like Bulls team, but if you're talking about the 96 Bulls team, if that's the team you're talking about, or the 92 Bulls team, none of those Rocket teams would have beaten those teams. None. But that's my opinion on that. Trying to rehash everything, so I don't want to add anything to this. Pretty much just that. I can't bet against Michael Jordan. I can't go against him. If you watch him in his prime, you watch him at his best, it did not matter who he was playing against. He would find a way to win. And when he was on the top, when he was on the biggest stage, he seldom failed to deliver. Even in games where he may not have had the most statistically dominating performance, he always came through in the end when the Chicago Bulls needed him. Hakeem Olajuwon had a great finals performance in '95 against Shaquille O'Neal. I'll give him that. In '94, he had a good finals performance by default because of the choke job that Patrick Ewing did, pretty much. And but that's pretty much what I have to say about this one. I think that as great as Hakeem Olajuwon is, as good as those Rockets teams were, I do think they were the beneficiaries of Michael Jordan's retirement. I think that had Michael Jordan not retired, Hakeem Olajuwon would have only won at least one championship. At least one. Possibly none. And Michael Jordan, just imagine what his legacy would be now if he never retired and he won 7 or 8 championships. I mean, that's crazy. I think, of course, Bill Russell won 11 championships. Sam Jones won 10 championships. John Havlicek won 8. So he'd be right up there with John Havlicek as far as championships. And his legacy would be different. Instead of scoring 32,000 points, Michael would have scored he'd be past where Karl Malone is. Somewhere around there. He'd be somewhere around where Karl Malone is. 36,000, maybe 37,000 points. Matter of fact, yeah, he would be around 37,000 points. Perhaps, that would have motivated him, the competitor that he is, that would have motivated him to break Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's scoring record. Because I know for a fact if he had played for the entirety of, the period between 1984 and 2003, he would have gotten well over 40,000, probably something like 43,000 points or something like that. But anyway, the point of my video is that I think that Michael Jordan's legacy is secure, but I think in this argument between Michael Jordan and Hakeem Olajuwon, I think that Michael Jordan was the greater player, and that would have shown through eventually in a series matchup between these two. But of course, tell me what you guys think. I know many of you are going to disagree. You're going to give me your reasons why you disagree.